Hello and welcome to another episode of the Retail Journey Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Charles Greathouse.
And I'm James Harris, and today joining us is Bryan Gildenberg. He's the founder and CEO of Confluencer Commerce, and you might recognize him from the CPG Guys podcast.
Yeah. Hey, how you guys doing? Yeah, so CPG Guys member and host of the podcast Fast Forward, which this will also be airing on with all the legal permissions that you have available to you. And it's Confluencer Commerce, just because it's like influencer, but we're conning people. So
Exactly.
At least we're straight up about it. No, and I also help run a retail research business called Retail Cities. I'm the managing director for North America as well.
So Bryan is up to a few things.
Yeah, keep busy. So running around, and thank you very much for inviting me down here to have a little chat and get to see the lovely confines of Northwest Arkansas again. Haven't been here in a while, so
You're here on a good week.
Yeah, it's crazy hot down here. So
it's warm.
Yeah, I've been having meetings outside all day because that's what we do in the middle of November now.
That's what we do. Beautiful day in Bentonville.
At least global warming's a myth, right? So we got that going for us. So.
Got that? You heard it here first. All right, captured.
Just throwing that out there. So
we'll put that in the highlight.
We're not here to talk about that. Oh, okay. So.
Okay. Yeah. Great. As we all know, the retail journey is non-linear, and you're no stranger to things perhaps going as planned, perhaps not. You and James have an interesting thing in common, and that's 15 years ago.
Yes.
Surprise. I'd love to just get in a little bit about like the man. Bryan Gildenberg.
Well, so James and I each share the delight of having boy-girl 15-year-old twins.
Yes.
So that was enough for me. That was a Canadian football 2-and-out, as they say.
2-and-out.
As they say. We punted on third down and got a rouge. But you kept going, so good on you.
One more.
So I have two 15-year-old kids, and I currently live in scenic Newark, New Jersey, which if any of you have ever been there, you know I am exaggerating its scenic properties.
There are things to see.
If you're ever flying into Newark Airport and you look to your right, you'll see Newark. Just wave. I live in one of those tall old buildings, and I'm staring right at you.
That's amazing.
There you go.
I love it. When did you first know you were going to be a CPG retail influencer?
I had no idea that I was going to be in the retail business until I was recruited, quote unquote, back when the old business that preceded Kantar Retail, where I spent a large part of my career, was an old business called MVI, run by a gentleman named Dan O'Connor, who still runs around our industry. Yeah. And that was a really small business. And a friend of mine from business school had started working there. And he's like, you should come work for us. I'm like, dude, I don't know a thing about retail, nothing. And he's like, that's fine. We'll teach you retail. It's like, you know how to write, you know how to teach. We'll teach you the retail part. And that's the superhero origin story. My background had nothing to do with this industry at all. I'd worked in the financial services industry, the petrochemical industry, and the nonprofit industry before I got here. So
I love it.
So
many of us here in retail didn't intend to be in the retail space, and
now I sometimes unintentionally work in the nonprofit industry, but that's part of the fun of being a sole proprietor. So
absolutely.
I love it.
So there you go. So I've been in this space for about 25 years now. So most of that at Kantar, a little bit at Omnicom, and for the last year on my own.
Okay. Well, and it seems like all three of us have a pretty good relationship with data.
Sure.
Maybe that's a place to start.
Okay, why not? Let's start.
And we've got some data changes in our Walmart world.
Yeah, we're all dating data, so to speak. So.
Walmart Luminate. So let's start there. What are the big trends you're seeing there in terms of Walmart Luminate and the changing environment for data?
Oh wow! And this is one I'm going to bounce some of this back to you guys because you're much closer to as the Brits say, much closer to the coalface on this problem than I am. I do think that there's obviously, as the retail world becomes more digital and as retail media becomes a bigger deal, and those two factors are related to one another, particularly in the US, which is where retail media is a very digital first ecosystem. If you actually go around the rest of the world, you'll find that retail media is not necessarily a digital first ecosystem. That in a lot of markets around the world, outside of the US and China, retail media actually started with the omni-channel brick and mortar retailers as a brick and mortar phenomenon first. That's not true in the US. It started as an Amazon phenomenon here, and it's obviously been exported, notably by people who used to work at Amazon, to a wide range of other retail platforms today. So there's a big componentry around how the digital ecosystem can drive and create demand. A lot of that is data-based. And then you've also got the retailers looking at the world where first-party data is becoming more of a scarce commodity, and data in general, as Google seeks to go on the journey of degrading its cookies, which just sounds like somebody left the Oreos out.
No
overnight.
more cookies.
Yeah. But that first-party data now becomes increasingly important. The ability to mine that data becomes increasingly important, and the retailers for years have been monetizing their own data. How Walmart's approaching that problem is not necessarily new, and not necessarily radically different. I do think it's really interesting. I'd be curious for your point of view on what that, some of us at this table know more about this than others, right? Yeah. But in terms of how you would expect that to change the vendor relationship with Walmart. I mean, obviously now with the two platforms for Luminate, one of which is basically what you used to get through the old DSS/Retail Link platform. The other is a more sophisticated version where I can see deeper channel analytics as well as shopper behavior analytics. Just curious to see how you think that's going to change the way vendors approach the problem here, because I have some hypotheses, but you know more about this than I do. So for once, I'll ask a question instead of babbling uninformedly about a problem.
That's a great question.
Love it.
And we might have different perspectives on it. From my perspective on Charter, there's an inadvertent, I think, separation of the 20 biggest companies and the 5,000 big but not as big companies, that this kind of levels the playing field a little bit. Everybody has the same data set.
Interesting.
One might use it more for turf protection, where another might use it for gaining turf. And then for the smaller businesses that are on basic, Walmart still leans very heavily on their suppliers, whether there's one person in the office or 50 people in the office. So they have to have a certain amount of data to be able to grow their baseline. One, because those are important businesses and brands to Walmart, so you can't just turn that off, and gives them a little runway to hit the critical mass to where purchasing Charter makes sense.
Yeah. My point of view, it goes back to some of the approval discussions when we were trying to launch Walmart Luminate. Right. Scott McCall, chief merchant at the time, was around when DSS came out and the impact it had. Walmart was the first grocer to go coast to coast. And in his mind, and I subscribe to the same perspective, the availability of data for decision making, for understanding performance, transparency to inventory, was the key driver of how they were able to scale, adapt to changing markets as they expanded from the central to the coasts, to be able to actually serve customers coast to coast. So I think it played a revolutionary role back when DSS came out. I expect now that we're in a much more digital environment that Walmart Luminate, specifically the Charter, subscription, will empower a similar revolution, because we're understanding the customer in a new, different way that has not been understood before. Unlike in the 90s, Walmart's not the first to this game. And so I think that there's a little bit of catching up perhaps required, certainly a first mover advantage for folks that get access early on, and those that are able to take this data, turn it into meaningful stories, not just for their brands, but for their categories. I think it'll have a significant impact on how shelves and e-commerce platforms at Walmart evolve over the coming years. Yeah,
I'll offer a couple of observations having watched this sort of play out in different places and in different countries. One of the concerns, what does Walmart care if I'm worried about them, right? But I think one of the things that does become an interesting challenge, and you talked about it, James, in the sort of the big versus everybody else. Look, if you're asking people to pay a lot of money for data, that's not going to benefit small companies by and large, right? That's just, there's no algebra that makes that work out particularly great. And if you look at Kroger, and look, Kroger's a wonderful business, and my dear friends there, hi. But if you look at the shelf at Kroger and you look at the percentage of new and innovative products that are on the shelf versus the percentage of not new and not innovative products, it's not a high ratio. And part of that is because Kroger has different objectives with the shelf than Walmart does, notably around private label. Kroger's shelf private label penetration in an average category is about 2x what Walmart's is. So cool, right? So some of that space is taken up by Kroger's trying to do some other stuff. But I don't know that between that and the heavily large supplier dependent way that category management works at Walmart, that you're creating an ecosystem which it is easy to find the brands that are going to grow the category. And that would probably be I think it'll be interesting to see how the merchants who have, and you guys know this better than I do. The merchants have had to learn how to do that, right? Especially in categories where there are big CPG players that are presenting them with an assortment that may or may not be an assortment that is as innovative as the category needs to be. They've had to work super hard to go find these new brands. They've had to hit the trade shows. They've had to go to Expo West. They've had to really immerse themselves in this new ecosystems. They may not be getting as much information about what's new as they used to.
Research direct to consumer.
Yeah, well, and just really, looking at the Amazon top sellers list, which right now is the most freely available way to kind of understand that anyway. So I do think it'll be interesting to see how accountable Walmart can keep brands that don't make most of the innovative products in the category for growth in the category, and how you don't lose sight of that, and and this is an age-old conversation at Walmart about how much growth does the category partner really want to plan in. So I mean, they've got their objectives to hit too, and then just how that process works. And increasingly, as this type of data becomes more of the language of how the joint business plan unfolds, it'll be interesting to watch. And I do think it's also interesting when you put that in the context of some of the lean in Walmart's going to do from a joint business planning process, which will make it I don't want to say more labor intensive, but certainly more intensive process with more and more suppliers trying to get to a broader joint business plan. I just think it's going to be interesting for brands and for businesses like yours, to be honest, to try to help some of these small brands. Like, I don't want to just shamelessly advertise your product, but I do think small brands are going to need help down here, probably more than they used to, and they already needed a fair amount of help. I don't know if you think that's a fair statement or not.
This is just specation on my part. So
this is all
nothing to base this on. But my
so disclaimer: Bryan does not know the future.
And none of us work at Walmart.
Exactly.
None of us have a Ouija board either. So for those of you not watching on video, we're not seancing the future.
Right. But my thought, because category advisorship started during my career. It's not a long thing, at least at Walmart.
Right.
And in the early days, you'd have a category advisor, a captain.
Yeah.
You might have a co-captain,
sure,
and or a challenger.
Yeah, you'd have the validators, basically, like the two old guys on the Muppet Show sit in the balcony and make fun of everything.
That's
right?
P&G and Unilever, or Kraft and General Mills.
Statler and Waldorf, by the way, in case you ever want to know what their names are.
It's the biggest share brand and the second biggest share brand usually were the way that kind of worked, because they had the resources to do it. Now, I think with not so much on the channel or POS inventory, the non-category advisors aren't going to have access to that, but they will have access to category level transactions.
Yeah.
So I think a good merchant has 3 or 4 or 5 validating, challenging advisorships.
Well, I mean, for the first time, you'll have a potential emerging brand, as long as they're sized well enough and have the aptitude to understand data and to use it to make decisions, which isn't the usual start point. There are certainly data native brands that are emerging in the market today, but as they have that approach, they now are able to be at the same table, the same data available to them, and not just on the category side. You can unashamedly use it from a sales perspective. I distinctly remember in my hair care days with Unilever, L'Oreal, Procter & Gamble telling me the future of hair care with decided confidence, no uncertainty, and yet they disagreed with each other enormously.
Yes.
As I'm listening to 3 different titans of industry explain to me exactly what's going to happen, and they can't all be right.
Yeah.
And somewhere in the middle is a bit closer to right. I'm excited for that to happen, not just in the categories that have multiple major CPG players, but now through help of folks like us and other brands can come to the table with access to that data.
Yeah.
That in the past, the little guys never had access to that kind of information.
And I think too, it's going to get interesting when you look at how product discovery works, because so much product discovery today lives in the digital and the content world.
Yep.
So whereas people used to come to the shelf and see something for the first time, and I was talking to Andy Murray about this, and sort of talking about the old days when P&G had Swiffer in the stores for 6 months before they had television advertising, and nobody knew what the heck a Swiffer was. So they had to really use the store as a way to explain the product, because that was the only way anybody was going to discover it before the national TV campaign hit. Obviously, today that's not the way any of that works. And
what's national TV?
Yeah, well, yeah. So I was talking to a friend of mine. This morning who's like, my kids don't know what live television is. They're teenagers and they've never had it at home. I think the interesting thing is that when you look at this, I do think that the importance of omnichannel here gets way more important, right? Because small brands can play in the digital world relatively easily. They can make an impact through Walmart Connect. They can start to do things that start to gather momentum in the .com world that are then sort of a proof of concept, if you will, for what they're going to be able to do. And I think that sort of omnichannel launch skill set is going to be much more important, and the ability to use retail media and digital shelf presence to be able to think about launch isn't just going to be important for small brands, but even for big ones as well. To be able to show the merchant that, look, there's momentum here, there's capability here, and we know how to reach the audience we're trying to reach. And by the way, plus points if that audience I'm trying to reach is an audience you're trying to bring into the stores. That's not your core audience.
Or bring back. I mean, for the first time as a merchant, being able to see repeat purchase rates. I mean, you talk about momentum. In the past, it was just dollars, but not every dollar is the same. No. If you're attracting very valuable customers, that's one thing. If you're attracting someone who's coming back more often, more frequently, and then even just with the data for the first time, actually having clear line of sight to e-commerce sales.
Right. Yes.
Walmart's got an incredible platform for selling. And in the past with DSS, you didn't quite understand what was a digitally initiated sale versus an in-store initiated sale. And I had people that thought they were doing 2 or 3% online and discovered they're 15, 20% once they actually saw the data.
Well, and this is going to really impact category management too, and this is something that's been an issue down here for a while. And I think it's particularly acute in certain categories where the pack size variation from what people buy in e-commerce versus what they buy in store is dramatic, or the brands that they buy. Because now all of a sudden the shelf's trying to do two jobs. It's trying to be a selling platform, but it's also a warehouse for the buy online pickup, for the online pickup and delivery. And getting the assortment right for that is really hard. And trying to figure out what the balancing act is between holding power in categories where e-commerce is disproportionately skewed towards a couple of brands and disproportionately skewed towards pack sizes that take up more shelf space versus variety is and without data, I think it's been hard for the brands to really sit down and have an intelligent conversation with Walmart about what that shelf's actually supposed to look like and what it's actually supposed to do. So
I think there's a positive down the line that comes from this change, and obviously it's a painful change for some, right? We're paying for something now that we didn't pay for before. But we talk about this a lot. I've heard more and more from Walmart that category growth is looked at like this, that a brand grows more if the category is growing than if they're just taking share from another brand in a non-growing category.
And even if they're not, Walmart doesn't care if you're taking share from another brand. I mean, most large brands have understood the language, and it's actually one of the real interesting challenges that large branded companies have when they're trying to reconcile their commercial plan with their media plan, because the media ecosystem has no idea what category growth is. I mean, they know that there are things they can do that will grow a category, but they're generally not accountable for it at all. Whereas once you get into this ecosystem, and it's particularly for the larger brands that are here, category growth is such a big part of what this team is, what the teams down here are paid to do. And it's such a critical KPI for the company. And yet media teams still come down here and are trying to, wondering why Walmart Connect won't let them do conquesting. It's like, well, why don't you do conquesting? Because we don't want you to do that. It's a total waste of time not for the media team, but for Walmart as an entity. There's an interesting argument to have about whether conquesting makes your advertising more valuable, which is a different question. But this whole back and forth, I think, is going to be really interesting, and trying to teach your entire company as a brand that category growth is an objective here, and that growing the category, yes, it grows brands more, but even if it didn't, it's obviously what Walmart wants, and the customer gets a vote, right?
So in your time exploring, understanding, learning retail, consulting folks, as you talk to brands that are on the largest side of the spectrum and the smaller side of the spectrum, can you talk to me about bringing category growth to life and how to get someone above just staring at their brand, trying to grow it, and paying attention to the category in both of those contexts?
It's a really good question. I think there's that's one where the cop-out answer is to say, it takes a village, right? But it kind of does. And I do think that large brands, partially and almost entirely, I think, because of the pressure that large retailers have put on them to drive category growth, and not just Walmart, but other ones, have changed the way they think about innovation, and at least can think about it in multiple tiers. I've got some innovations that, I'm just putting on the shelf to replace something else, right? And I'm not expecting it to outperform what was there before. I'm just expecting that the performance of the thing that's already there is going to decline.
Doesn't go completely away.
So I'm going to replace it, right? And it's not really going to do much more apart from that. I've got some that, they're share grabbers for me. I tend to talk about those less in a JBP.
Yeah,
I put them in, but they're in the back of the deck. And then I think a lot of the innovation cycle, though, and a lot of the work that we used to do at Kantar with clients, was helping them root innovation back in legitimate consumer trends. So, Charles, those future hair care presentations, I've seen more of those than I care to think about in my life, right?
Totally.
And for a number of, for one or more of the companies that you're talking about.
You probably built all three of those. That's okay.
Yeah, we did it.
I was confused, but informed.
I was blind, but now I see. But I was confused but informed. I think I got to put that on my business card.
Yeah, you can take that one.
Might be on my tombstone. But the idea there is that should not just be a goofy PowerPoint that you start a meeting with, but you should be able to trace the innovations back to them, right?
Exactly.
And
what
just
consumers
say,
want.
what's going to make the consumer spend more in this category, right? And if they're going to spend more, that means that you've got to solve a problem for them in some basic level that they weren't solving on their own. Yes, equity is great, and people will pay more for premium brands, and Saatchi and their love marks and all that stuff, cool, right? But in the end, if I'm not solving a problem for a consumer, I'm probably not justifying the incremental expense that they're going to route to this category. And I think that's particularly acute anytime the economy gets kind of ropey, right? So I mean, there's most of the great innovations that grow categories solve the problem in a different way.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that they often solve it, though it might be more expensive than other things in the category. It's cheaper than however you were solving the problem before.
The compensating behavior was more expensive in either real terms or time.
Yeah, Swiffer was $20, but it was cheaper than Housekeeper, right? So that's that sort of trade-off thinking, that sort of category growth and that. And I think today, like in food, it's a massive opportunity in food, given how expensive food at home has become through delivery services. If you look at Uber Eats and DoorDash and the premiums that the restaurants charge just on their menu pricing to make their own economics work, and then the service charge and the gratuity that you need to add, or you get the world's worst Uber driver.
Right. The slowest, at least.
Yeah, if you're not going to take, now all of a sudden you're out literally $20 more than you would have been to go to the restaurant for the food delivered to home. And now all of a sudden Walmart or any retailer, it's an enormous opportunity to say, hey, look, just come buy food here, right? We got food. We got food you can cook in a minute. Like your kids are hungry, do this. It's half the cost and it takes half the time. Like that sort of proposition, you could slide any solution you want into that and almost any price point you want. It's still cheaper than that.
Right. So. And to bring it to large brands and small, as a small company, small brand, I think a lot of people make the mistake of deselecting themselves from that conversation.
Yeah.
Do you think smaller brands have the right to be in that conversation with their merchant? And how do you guide them to?
I think smaller brands are often liberated from the existing solution in a way that larger brands are not. And I think oftentimes a lot of the innovation in categories has come from smaller brands. And pre-COVID, if you looked at the degree to which small brands in the United States were outperforming large ones pre-COVID, they were growing 2.5 times faster than larger brands. And there's a reason for that. They were solving problems differently.
Right.
And they also were able to reach consumers that were trickier to reach in more innovative ways because they weren't the prisoner of an existing media budget or a marketing mix model that, God bless it, was built in 1989. Right. Yeah. And look, I have a lot of friends who work in marketing mix modeling, and they're smart people, but any model is a prisoner of the assumptions that built it, right?
Yep.
It's like you can do whatever you want to your house in terms of putting extensions on and stuff, but the foundation's foundation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and there's only so many extensions you can put on that thing before it isn't code anymore, or it tips over. And and that the foundations of any model are the assumptions that built it. And one of the things that I think people are starting to unwind now is that a lot of the media spend in the world has been guided by models whose assumptions were that television works.
Right.
And if it does,
and for a long time it did.
Yeah, and Ponzi schemes work until they don't. So
That's right.
But it's like the whole idea here is that the way in which you reach consumers has changed fundamentally. I think brands that aren't a prisoner to the old way of doing it, generally speaking, start out with a little bit of a head start in that race, and are also, generally speaking, incented to solve the problem differently. So if they're solving the same way, why would they be there? Yeah. So why would they even exist?
Yeah, I see the problem. If it's not focused on the customer and making the customer's life better, you've missed the point. And to your point, as a large brand, your problem might be a self-created problem because the marketing mix was one thing one year and last year was this thing, and you need to lap that thing instead of just paying attention, being liberated from last year's budget and just looking at the customer.
Well, I remember talking, as you were using hair care as an example, I was talking to a hair care brand about this, and this will lead us into, I think, some of the stuff that AI can do in a minute, right?
Yeah.
So I was talking to a hair care company about this a couple years ago, probably a few now, and they were, I think, what was the trend? I was coconut oil or something like that, one of those things, right? Just one of those trendy ingredients, and like, well, we launched this product and it flopped, and because we were telling them about the need to be on trend, and they were talking about how this launch failed, and I was sitting there and I'm like, okay. So in the meeting, I just go into Google Analytics and try to find out when the search term coconut oil had
4 years before.
It was literally 12 months before the product had launched. Yeah. And it's like, this thing was cool a year ago.
Yeah.
And unless you really thought about how to maintain and build that momentum, which you can do, by the way, you can do that. But unless you thought about it and you just thought you were going to catch a wave, waves don't last forever, right? Yeah. Otherwise, people would never stop surfing.
Try to catch them after they break. It's a little more hard.
Yeah, certainly.
Sand is coming.
Not as much fun. From what they tell me, I don't surf. But it doesn't look like as much fun when you catch the wave after it broke. So.
Yeah, I just know from YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, not a surfer.
100-foot wave, like the show. So
don't have the balance. No. My family's laughing at me right now.
Yeah, anybody that's ever known me is laughing hilariously at the idea of me surfing.
So you mentioned AI. That's where we wanted to go next. There's going to be some people listening that roll their eyes, and then there's going to be another group of people listening. Go, oh, what's this going to do?
Right.
What's your take on how AI in large or down to ChatGPT, what it can bring to retail?
Well, look, I think there's a couple of things, and one of which is, we chatted about this a little bit yesterday, but I think one of the things that's really important is that you learn from the last two eye-rolling initiatives that companies have deployed in the quote-unquote digital world. The first was D2C, and the second was the metaverse. So, if you think about all the buzz around D2C, particularly during the pandemic, it's like, oh, we got to reach all these consumers. And then the metaverse came along for some reason and did stuff.
That was great.
So it was awesome. So it was the RFID tag of its time, right? So
it's coming around.
Who knows?
Callback.
QR codes were a solution in search of a problem for years, and finally COVID gave them their moment. Maybe something will give the metaverse its moment. Like we're never allowed to leave our houses ever. And that's the only way we can talk to each other. Let's hope that happens. The challenge there, in addition, there's two things. Number one, the initiatives, and this is the problem you have with AI and the risk, right? Which is that a lot of companies are doing this because their board of directors wants to know what the AI strategy is. They ask the CEO what the AI strategy is. The CEO doesn't know. The CEO goes and yells at the CTO and says, what's our AI strategy? And now all of a sudden you have a need to check a box on what the CEO is reporting back to the board. Yeah. That's what happened in D2C, and that's what happened in Metaverse. The other thing with D2C is that you had an ecosystem that was trying to sell you what I might charitably call as a bill of goods on some of that stuff around what that thing was supposed to do, and there was a fear thing involved in both. On D2C,
you're going to miss it.
First-party data was the big one. You need to collect first-party data. Collecting first-party data is an awesome idea, and if you have a really cool idea in D2C, that's a really good way to do it. If you approach D2C as though your objective is to acquire first-party data, that's like saying I'm coaching a football team and my objective is to win the game by scoring more points than the other team. Not incorrect. Certainly a good idea. you would probably need some supporting documentation on how you hope to accomplish that. And in particular, you would need good players and a plan. And companies didn't do that. They said, we're going to score more points than the other team. Oh, we need players? Oh, let's just pick up some guys off the street and throw them on the field, see what happens. Yeah, it didn't work. A lot of brands don't have a reason to connect to customers or consumers in a D2C way, and we're deeply disappointed by that. It didn't replace anything that was already being done, or it replaced something that was already being done perfectly fine. That was the same problem with the metaverse. The metaverse replaced something that was already being done perfectly fine, which is real life. So for most people, real life is cool. And I don't need...
Some of us need a second life.
Yes, right, a third life or whatever. So the metaverse wasn't replacing anything. I think the difference, and with AI, and now we'll get into the nuts and bolts of this, because AI, most of what people are talking about when you talk about AI, they're actually talking about ChatGPT, which is a product owned by a company, OpenAI, which is a form of text-based generative AI, which is a form of generative AI, which is a form of AI. So we have to do our little biology homework. Shout out to my daughter who hates her biology homework. But we've got to go through the process of phylum, genus, species, whatever, right? Like, AI is a much bigger concept than ChatGPT. That being said, if you just look at text-based generative AI, just to start there, because it's where everybody kind of starts the conversation today, it's got enormous, because what that can do is that actually does replace something people are already doing, which is searching for stuff. It's like, okay, finally, an intuitive business application for something that somebody's developed from a technology point of view. That's going to get really interesting, right? So that's a whole conversation to have around how, as the customer gets more used, and customer, you all say customer, I say consumer, because in my world, the customer's the guys up the road here. But on the consumer shopper side, how does that change the way that the consumer expects text-based solutions to solve problems for them? And my guess is that will dramatically impact what is already a pretty shaky leg that search stands on in this ecosystem. Because today, more product searches have started on Amazon than on Google for years. And now more product discovery takes place on TikTok than anywhere else. So now I've got two very different search algorithms, which are TikToks and Amazons, that are driving a lot of product discovery and a lot of shopping behavior. And Google is just kind of there doing its little thing. And now if you get something else that replaces that, you're going to very quickly find that there's no unified search architecture for shopping anymore. And that's got enormous implications for the 23% of global media spend that's spent on search. It is depending how you account for it, arguably the largest media platform in the world. Is not even product retailer.com search, but just actual general website-based search, right?
Searching for information.
Google, Bing, shout out, DuckDuckGo.
So,
all those, yes. So Alta Vista. Let's go. Let's
keep going.
Yeah. So next on dead search engines, it's So I think you've got a really interesting. I think you've got a really interesting conversation there about what that means. Then I think, though, if you look at what you've seen, Amazon today with their third-party network, they've already enabled most of their third-party sellers to generate a lot of their product description pages through AI. And for something where you're not trying to be artistically brilliant, but really more technically compliant, AI is really good at that stuff. Like AI is not great at artistic brilliance, but if it just needs to be able to do something that fits a spec, it can learn the specs. You can train it on the specs super fast. And then it draws the right conclusions about what to put in the spec. So that's a really interesting application. I think in general, though, when you look at AI, like any technological innovation, I think people are expecting, oh, well, it's going to get all my work done and I can go home at 2 o'clock. Well, technology never does that. What technology does is it creates more things to do, right? And I think that's what AI is going to do, because the minute you start to harness AI, again, defer to you gentlemen on this, the minute you start to harness AI, you realize that you can do more content variations than you used to be able to do more easily. And you're going to be able to then deploy those content variations against meaningfully different audience segments within the retailer's ecosystem. So instead of having one product description page or one promotional campaign, you may have 30 or 40 or 100. And you've got retailers today, like Kroger, who are really good at giving you granular audience and behavioral-based segmentation data back, so that if you wanted to run 4,000 meaningfully different campaigns at Kroger, you could do that today. You've got the data to do it. Just no one knows how. So I think there's a really interesting question, whether it's text-based or image-based, stuff like Midjourney, and then Amazon now also enabling its first-party sellers to use AI to generate a variety of product images on its site for your product description page.
Yeah.
All of which seem to be very rule-based, and all of which are probably going to end up to the consumer who may not know, but they're all going to feel like every clip art presentation we sit through in PowerPoint, right? Like the same 75 clip art images on every PowerPoint presentation.
I've seen this before.
And many websites.
White dudes with arms in their hair, awesome. So that's cool. We're doing great. And so that's I think there's a risk to some of that in terms of the sameness of unless you're really smart about how you train your AI.
Incorporate.
To incorporate
demographics or
just incorporate anything interesting. Yeah. You're going to get what the AI was originally coded to do back, which I think is the risk of being very, very samey. But I do think you're going to see more outputs. You're going to see more. You're going to be able to get to more outputs faster. That's just going to create more work on the data analytics side. And if only there were an analytics business around that could comment on that, I would ask them, but I'll just sit quiet.
And there's so many applications to analytics. We use a few of them today, but are exploring what should we be incorporating.
Yeah.
Just a kind of a personal view, I think a company like a Kantar or Cleveland, a research group that trains on POS data, trains on full category, trains on item launches, success, failure, media, demographics, that a lot of things that require an analyst to read multiple things and then do some searching and then kind of white space, ideate around what this means as an overarching story. I think that's something that AI can really accentuate.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to your point, the impact, like where does it actually hit the road? What's the thing that you're trying to accomplish? Your coaching analogy, I kept picturing a business plan and like, what's the plan? Well, the plan is to make money.
Yeah.
Like, this is great. I feel like that's the right plan, but how?
I used to have a slide in a deck like this. It was Albertson's mission statement, or like their corporate strategy. And it was like a whole bunch of stuff about gaining market share and driving revenue. It's like, there's a bunch of outcomes in here, right? Like,
great.
So, and this is, we're going to score more points the other team. We're going to get more yards. It's like, yeah, how? Like,
how?
And it's not the current Albertsons one, by the way. So no knock on the current management team. Those are people that are gone. Blessedly.
When we were building out the digital merchant product group, we brought on our first data scientist to lead data science within merch, Prakar Mayorda. He's still there. We went to the Toronto Machine Learning Summit, and we blew people away by applying AI. There's a role focused on explainability. If you're in retail and you need to hire someone to do explainability, I mean, that happens because a board member said you need to do AI. And then you couldn't understand it. You needed to explain it, so you created a role for explainability. Like, their job is to explain what happened. You know, there's a side of that that's really sad because you've missed the point. And the point was to make better decisions, perhaps more decisions, without having to actually spend more time looking at things. You know, for data science in our world, it's looking at future out of stocks.
Right.
And building the algorithms necessary to identify where you're going to be out in the future.
Right.
Which, without a healthy input from a data standpoint and good machine learning to be able to understand all of the different store item customer trend combinations, you're not going to be able to see that future out of stock. Yeah. And with Walmart Luminate, it gets ratcheted up to an entirely different level because we're now looking at shopper behavior and seeing how shopper trends evolve and anticipating, well, with repeat purchase, the way it's trending with new to category purchasers, with new to retailer purchasers, here are the things that are more valuable. And that empowers a better decision on behalf of the merchant.
Well, and the great advantage of AI is that it can incorporate, provided you know how to train it, a multitude of demand signals.
So many.
And then you just have to learn how to weight those appropriately. Yep. And then that allows you to look at a broader field of vision. So I think that's a big one. But this, in defense of the explainability department, not that I have any particular vested interest in it, but I do think there is a really important role for, you know, people talk about machine learning all the time as a competency. Well, look, machine learning, that's what machines do, right? And very technical people are the people that adapt machine learning. I think the critical competency for companies as they move into this world won't be machine learning, it'll be machine teaching. So I'm going to borrow, you know, what Andy Murray actually puts it this way. He goes, the fifth P in the 4 Ps of marketing is going to be the prompt. How do you prompt the computer to learn differently? And I think that one of the things that I've observed through some dear friends that work at Amazon that they've taught me over the years is that Amazon's computers aren't smarter than other computers, and Amazon's people are smart, but they're bell curve smart, right? The thing Amazon's better at than any other business in the digital world is their people are better at telling computers what to do than other companies. They have people
understand the tool.
They are people that are very good at the explaining department the other way.
Yeah.
They're very good at explaining business requirements to a technical team. So if you think about the people that grew up at Amazon who are product directors and product managers, they're very good at developing the business requirements for a technical solution to things. That's a really scarce skill in an analog business. And it's a hard skill to hire, it's a hard skill to value, and it's a hard skill to train for. But I do think the ability to teach machines is important.
I totally
and
agree.
then the ability that gives you to speak how the machine speaks to some degree, and to explain back to people that are less technical how to think about what the business requirements would be to train AI. This is going to be AI training is going to be a very big business.
Otherwise, you're just asking someone to trust that it has made your decision better than you would have made it.
Yes.
And in the day at Walmart, visiting the e-com team, trying to understand why my top items weren't showing up where they should, I kept being told, oh, that's algo driven. I'm like, that's super great. What about the algorithm is making my number 700 item show up number 2? Oh, it's algo driven. I heard you. What about the algorithm? And so I think understanding what's going on, what are the levers that are being pulled, to your point as the coach, what's the actual game plan? Are we heavy on defense? Do we have a weak spot in the lineup? You know, where are the actual things that are going on so I know how to trust, validate, or use the things that are coming out from AI?
Well, and there's a entire cottage industry of people that historically were dedicated to understanding how the algo worked, right, and decoding the algo. I mean, there's a bunch of smart people around that did that for a living. I think that's the thing, machine learning. It's actually going to be really interesting for search engines, to be honest, because machine learning and AI will be able to decode the search engine really fast, I suspect. So there's not going to be a lot of secret sauce to that stuff anymore, which I think is another reason why search is becoming an increasingly problematic medium. Because it'll just be way easier to buy it than it used to be, because AI will decode it more quickly. And the retailers are always looking to innovate their search algorithm, both to quote unquote improve experience, but also really to prevent bid optimization by knowing how the algorithm works, right? So they make more money by confusing people, to be brutally honest. And so they have to keep changing the algorithm to make it so that they know more about their inventory than you do. Because as my old friend Erwin Gottlieb, the old chairman of Group M at WP said, just leaned back in his chair in a meeting once and goes, the whole history of making money in media is when somebody knows more than somebody else. And he's not wrong. It's a really good way to think about the problem. The last piece, I think, so this demystification of AI, I think, is really important. And the ability for people to act as like, human Duolingo platforms, if you will, between the machine learning world and the machine teaching world is going to be really important. But this machine teaching thing is going to be a really critical competency for anybody that's trying to work in the AI world.
That's demystifying is the right word.
Yes.
There's still some mist in the air, but
demisting, yes. So
demisting. Yeah. All right, I think we are time for the lightning round.
All right, there we go.
Let's start with the big one. We try to talk about failures. What's one of your biggest failures that you've learned
today,
the most from?
Or apart from leaving my phone charger and my AirPods at O'Hare on Monday, so that was a fail. I always go back to the piece where, I think in predicting retail trends, it's a great Boston sports radio DJ named Eddie Andelman who said, anybody who's right more than 50% of the time ought to go to Vegas and retire. So it's like, okay, that makes sense. I feel like, when you get to predict things, you kind of got to be right a little bit more than 50. My first one, though, was my first project I worked on in the retail industry, which was in 1997, where I boldly predicted that to the Newspaper Association of America, thankfully they're not around anymore. So sorry about this. Where I boldly predicted they should double down on their advertising for Circuit City, because clearly Best Buy was going to go out of business and Circuit City was going to take over the consumer electronics world.
It is.
So that was incorrect. Spoiler alert.
You heard it here first.
Spoiler alert, that wasn't true.
That did not go down.
So, I think, that was, I think that I think most of the time most of my learnings have really been more on the commercial side of trying to grow a small business.
Yeah.
And I think the thing I've learned probably more than anything is just because something is a good idea doesn't mean you should do it.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and anybody who knows me knows I have a propensity for distraction, which, as you've observed on this podcast, which is quite high. So that propensity for distraction can translate itself into doing too many things that are of interest, but that you lack the bandwidth to be able to scale if you're doing all of them.
Right.
And the choice to do a bunch of good things is not necessarily a better choice than the choice to not do that good thing and to do one or two things well.
Got to hear.
I think most of the failures in the world are some were just terrible ideas, but for the most part, they were good ideas that were bandwidth constrained and then got executed very poorly.
Yeah. The Donnie Smith, former CEO of Tyson, taught me about aggressively pursuing your to-don't list.
Yes, yeah.
Your to-do list is great, and everybody's got one of those. But if you don't have a to-don't list, you're probably wasting a lot of time on things that's not going to add up to much.
Yep, strategy is all about what you don't do. So one of the good Jack Welch quotes. So
love it.
So,
all right, and what's on your reading list?
don't you guys talk about failures? Oh no, okay, never mind.
We asked the questions here,
described
Brad.
90% of mine in business is trying to do too much. And
it's okay. It's your time. I get it. So, all right. What's on my reading list at the moment? There's a book about AI, which I've forgotten the name of, but it's the big book about AI at the moment, written by the big guy on AI, and I cannot remember the name of it. But it's go to the bookstore. It's the book on AI. Haven't loved it so far, to be totally honest. It's not moving me anywhere. The two things I'm reading that are most interesting right now are a book called The Prediction Machine. I can't remember the author, but it's a book about how the human brain processes information and about how incorrectly we've thought about that, in that the idea was historically that you would sense the world, take that sensation, apply a model to it, and observe. But what really looks like it happens when you look at the neurological science of it is that the predictive engine you have in your head is way more powerful than your sensing of the outside world. So that you need to train the AI model, which is your preconceived idea of the world. You need to really work at that. Otherwise, you will just see what you have always seen. And then you'll use the data to calibrate that idea of what you've always seen. Has enormous implications for being observational and present in moments. Also has enormous applications for things like anxiety, where you are presupposing a bad outcome. And it's really hard, if you're not wired that way, to use data to tell you to not be that way.
Right.
So there's a bunch of neurological and mental health aspects to it, as well as just generally the importance of remembering to be present, to shut off your predictive engine.
Yeah.
And just to observe. I mean, Marcus Aurelius, Gandhi, everybody who's ever written a philosophy book, basically, all they're writing about is shut the predictive engine off and see the world for what it is. So that's a cool read. And then a novel called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which is awesome so far. So
I'm going to check that out for sure.
Yeah.
And then last one here, at least for me, is you have a bucket list item that you're going to accomplish this year.
This year. Is that like next 12 months or by the end of 2023? More to come on this front, but if I don't do something that looks like a book by this time next year, I will be disappointed in myself.
I like it.
Awesome.
Let's go.
Hold that thought. So more to come. So, but that would be that's something I've always wanted to do, and I've just never had the bandwidth to do it. I don't have the bandwidth to do it now, but what the hell?
Awesome.
No time like the present. So
I love it.
So, there you go.
Well, thank you so much. This has been.
Oh, thank you guys. This has been great. And we're going to throw this on the Fast Forward podcast as well. So I'll put a little intro on that, and then we'll rock and roll. So really look forward. Obviously, Charles, always good to see you, and James, it's been great really meeting you on this.
It's great to meet you.
We spent a lot of time together before. So thank you very much for the time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks,
Bryan. Thanks for all the time you gave us, and thank you for listening. You can download, listen to or watch all of our podcasts on highimpactanalytics.com or on Apple, Spotify, and other podcast services. Thank you very much.